So, welcome to our special series on Megillas Esther. So we'll learn together, God willing, every weekday, Tuesday to Tuesday inclusive. A Sunday, there's going to be someone else doing something else. But we'll have the rest of the week, and then Monday and Tuesday next week, God willing. Okay. All right. So we're going to start off with a introduction, a little about the history, a little about the characters, and see where we go from there. So we're not going to start right at the beginning, like Hashem created the heavens and the earth. We'll go a little bit after that. So we know Moshe took the Jews out of Egypt. Of course, he didn't quite make it into Israel, at least not yet, when Mashiach comes, God willing. And in the Yeshua took the Jews into the land of Israel. They were about 480 odd years till they built the first base of Mikdash. And the first base of Mikdash was for 410 years. Now, while the first base of Mikdash was around, there was already many prophecies. So there was already prophecies about the third base of Mikdash. The prophecies about the third base of Mikdash, while the first base of Mikdash was in existence. Now, if we would have had the merit, it would have gone from the first, the second, to the third without an interruption. A little bit like sometimes you have, someone lives in a house, and they, might add to the back of the house, and then they move into the back, and then they renovate the front. By the time they're finished, there's a totally brand new house, but they never moved out. All right, so it's, not saying this is the most practical way to do it, but it can be done. So we could have gone seamlessly from first base of Mikdash, the second to third, without a gap, had we so had the merit. Now, the advantage of the base of Mikdash is that we can elevate the godly sparks in the world through the base of Mikdash. A lot of what happened isn't necessarily punishment per se. It's more just a practical consequence, just to give a parable. If someone has to take a bucket of sand from one room to the next room. So it's a relatively simple task, and it takes, let's say, 2 minutes. Now, on the way, what happened is he dropped the bucket. So didn't kick the bucket, chas v'sholom, just dropped it. Right, so now he has to go get a dustpan and a brush. He has to sweep up the sand. And so what should have taken 2 minutes is now going to take half an hour. But then not only that, he took a rest in the middle. He leaned on the wall, and by mistake, he turned on the fan. And now the sand is blown all over the room. And so now it takes days to get every little drop of sand and to sweep it up. So with the base of Mikdash, we could have elevated the entire world essentially from Yerushalayim. What happened is, unfortunately, we spoilt it. We dropped the bucket. Some things were done on purpose, some things not on purpose. The bottom line is we actually had to go places to elevate the sparks there. So even in the second base of Mikdash, it wasn't as powerful because we didn't have the Aron, we didn't have the Ark so the Jews had to be in other places, such as Bavel. But generally speaking, everyone was in, at least the beginning of the second base of Mikdash period, everyone was in the Middle East. Times got worse. We turned on the fan and various things. And eventually, via the Roman Empire, Jews spread to many other regions in the world. And there's been many opportunities we've had over the years to bring Mashiach. Unfortunately, it hasn't panned out. And after each missed opportunity, Jews have to go to other places, to the point where we have Jewish people who, now in America, even in Australia, right? We have Jews who've gone everywhere. Fiji, right? Saw an advertisement recently for a mile to go to Fiji, right? I'm not a mile anyway, but they have Papua New Guinea. I know Jewish people have lived there for a few years. You name it, Jews have had to actually physically gone to a place to elevate the sparks. I think I may mention this at a previous class one time along these lines that, there was a period of time where my family was living in Sydney, but although my family had always been in Sydney, my parents had moved to Melbourne. And we used to drive back and forwards at vacation time. And that's about a 10-hour drive. So one time misjudged the amount of gas we had to the next stop. Now, Baruch Hashem, we didn't run out. Don't get too worried. But I had to pull off the freeway into a little country town somewhere to go fill up. So we found this little country town, this little gas station. We filled up. While we're already there, with the kids in the car, we had lunch. And it occurred to me, we may be the very first Jews who had ever come to this little place in the middle of nowhere. So, we made sure we said some psukim with the kids, some verses of Torah, and 12 psukim, and we, of course, we benched after the meal. And who knows, that little spot of ground may have been waiting since the 6 days of creation for this family to come along and, say some words and do some davening there. So that's what we did from the base of Mikdash. We could elevate the entire world. So as well as having prophecies about the third base of Mikdash, there were also prophecies about the destruction of the first base of Mikdash. Now, the original prophecies were theoretical, meaning like this. The Jewish people were told, you can turn this around, right? If you can change. Now, obviously, not every Jew was misbehaving, and there were many fine Jewish people doing what they need to be doing, but it was more the upper class was starting to assimilate and various things, and that was the second base of Mikdash. The first base of Mikdash, which we're speaking about, it was more they slipped into morality. There was a lot of politics going on. I know you can't imagine any politics in the Jewish community, but it happened. But unfortunately, got to the point where people were there were political assassinations. It wasn't the best time, and it was the upper class to a large extent had control of the base Mikdash, and things got out of hand. So several of the prophets, Yirmiyahu at the forefront, told the Jewish people, this is what's going to happen if you don't change. If we change, it won't happen. And it was at such a point where the Book of Esther, right, which Yirmiyahu officially wrote after the destruction of the base of Mikdash, it was called the Book of Lamentations. It was about his feelings about the terrible destruction. He actually wrote 3 of the chapters before the base of Mikdash was destroyed. What happened? Hashem showed him the vision. He saw the destruction before it happened. And his mission was to avert that destruction. And he wrote it, he brought it to the king. The king told him it's rubbish, we're not interested, and he burnt it. And then unfortunately, the people did not change, and the Book of Lamentations had to be written again from scratch, and more of it. So that was the end of the first base of Mikdash period. There was also a prophecy that when it does get destroyed, or it wasn't so clear that it was from time destruction, but there's going to be an exile period. Again, if we don't change. If we don't change, there's going to be a period of foreign domination that's going to last for 70 years. And this is the important part, 70 years. The Babylonians, led by Nebuchadnezzar, charming fellow, and I say that sarcastically. The Babylonians are absolutely ruthless. I mean, it was the point, forget the atrocities that happened in war. The Babylonians, after they conquered a nation, the soldiers for sport would take babies, two babies, hold them by the ankles, and swing them together and try and smash both skulls in one shot. So you're talking about, really horrible people. Nebuchadnezzar had captured kings. He kept them in a room of his palace, and every day he publicly raped one of them in front of the others, just to show that he's in charge. It was really, really low class, horrible person. So he started to march on Israel. He wanted to conquer the world. One of his stops was Israel. The first thing that he did was he won. He took away the king, as he installed a puppet king, or at least who he thought would be a puppet king, and he was in charge. Later on, they rebelled, meaning the Jewish people, they stopped paying taxes and different things. They assumed that Nebuchadnezzar won't come. They said three things. Number one, they said, he's not going to come. Number two, they said, if he does come, Egypt will come help us. Number three, even if Egypt doesn't come help us, we'll win anyway. And each claim was more ridiculous than the other. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, what do you mean he's not going to come? He's the bully. He lets one person off, everyone's going to rebel. Obviously, he's going to come. Now, although there was a thought to say that Egypt might come to help, because if he's already marching in that direction, the next stop is Egypt. So Egypt may prefer to have a war in Israel's territory rather than their own territory. Having said that, though, we all know throughout history, Egypt have not been the best friends of the Jewish people. And even today, with a although it's not the same people in Egypt, even today with a peace treaty officially, it's a rather cold. It's not really a peace; it's just an absence of war, right? There's still the elders of Zion, on their television channels, and tremendous anti-Semitism. We don't, and those in those days it was the original Egyptians, right? We didn't have a history of Egypt being our friends, so it was a weird thing to expect. And then the third claim that if he comes, he'll win anyway. I mean, who are they kidding? So why did they think that? They thought that because they reasoned to themselves, no matter how bad we are, they're worse. Hashem's not going to punish us or let these people win. Hashem's not going to let his house get destroyed from these people, because look at them. Look who Nebuchadnezzar is. How can such a person be able to achieve anything? That was their thought. Unfortunately, they were wrong. So on the one hand, they're sort of correct. Nevertheless, what happened was that what should have happened to the Jewish people happened to a building instead. So it was a diversion to a large extent. But because people had this misconception, they didn't change. No matter how many warnings they got, they said, you know what? Nothing bad's going to happen. We don't have to worry. So, unfortunately, Nebuchadnezzar came. He destroyed the place. He burnt down the first base Mikdash. It was Tisha B'Av. It was a tragic time. People then were eagerly awaiting the end of the 70 years for the redemption. Okay, now that they know the prophecy of destruction is true, therefore the continued prophecy of being saved and rebuilding the base of Mikdash, that's also going to be true. Now, people assumed the 70 years started from when Nebuchadnezzar created the Babylonian Empire. That was their assumption. And since the Jews assumed that, so did everyone else. That was the assumption. Okay, this is a bit of a long introduction, but just to give the idea. So Belshazzar was the next emperor of the Babylonian Empire. When 70 years were up from Nebuchadnezzar creating the Babylonian Empire, or was getting close to 70 years, he got worried. He believed in the prophecy. And part of the prophecy was that the Jews would become an independent nation. The nations that had controlled them would hadn't treated them nicely. There'd be some type of repercussions for them. And he got worried. He was worried that he would lose his empire. 70 years according to his calculation, which is from the wrong date, because the 70 years was really from the actual destruction. And Nebuchadnezzar came emperor quite a while before this. So 70 years were up according to his calculation and the Jews' calculation, because everyone was miscalculating they were calculating from the wrong date. And so he made a big party, made a party to celebrate. And he was so confident the Jews would never be redeemed. And that was the end of the Jewish people, God forbid, that he even dared to do something he hadn't done before. He used some of the vessels that had been captured from the base of Mikdash. And there's a famous story of the writing on the wall. And that very night, of course, the Persians and the Medes combined force came and attacked. Belshazzar was killed, and then became the Persian Empire. The first king was a Mede, the second king was a Persian. That was how they worked. And time went on. So people then assumed if the 70 years was not from the time Nebuchadnezzar became king, started the empire, and we see he got punished for using the vessels, the base of Mikdash, his empire was destroyed. So it must be the Hashem is still protecting Jewish people. So the prophecy must be true. It must be, then the starting date must be from when Nebuchadnezzar conquered Yerushalayim the first time. So it was the second time he destroyed the base of Mikdash, but the first time when he took the king into captivity. So people started to count the 70 years from then. Now, in the meantime, the Mede, the king of the Medes, so it was a sort of combined Persian Mede empire. The king of the Medes, he allowed the Jewish people to go back. He allowed all the conquered peoples to go back. And so amongst that meant the Jewish people go back and they could build the base of Mikdash. And they did try to start, but it didn't get very far. There was a reports sent back to the king. The Jewish people are planning to rebel. They're making their own kingdom. And he didn't live very long. And before it got resolved, he passed away. And Achashverosh somehow got himself to be the king. Now, he wasn't of royal descent. He was someone who'd been a servant, like a minister beforehand, but he managed to kill the right people and twist and turn, and he got himself the king. He married Belshazzar's daughter, who had been captured. He captured her when the Persians and Medes had come in. So he had the daughter of Belshazzar, the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, as his wife, and he used that as leverage to, so to speak, make himself royal. Now, although we'll speak about the characters more soon, and by the way, any questions, please don't be shy, right? So the way we normally tell the story, especially do plays and different things, is Achashverosh is a fool, right? And that Haman manipulated him. Now we have to understand that Achashverosh was brilliant. He was definitely not a fool. No one became king in the ancient world if they were a fool. And if somehow they inherited the title, which Achashverosh didn't, he got it for himself, they didn't last very long if they were, foolish. He was a very sly, cruel, vindictive person. He was a terrible anti-Semite. Haman was worse, but Achashverosh was a terrible anti-Semite. The reason that he's made out to be a fool, or make out that Achashverosh that was manipulated by Haman, because we have to understand when the Megillah was written, Achashverosh was still the king. So if the Jewish people would put in the Megillah that Achashverosh was a murderer, thief, lowlife, sick, vindictive dictator, that may not have gone down very well. He may have found that slightly offensive. And when you have such a person, you try and avoid offending them, especially when they have power over your life and death. So that's the why it's the Megillah is sort of written that way a little bit, that that he was manipulated by Haman, but he knew exactly what he was doing. So he became king. 3rd year into his reign, the next lot of 70 years is up. In other words, 70 years from Israel being conquered by Nebuchadnezzar and the king being taken into captivity. Now he's pretty sure the 3 years are up, and he wants to celebrate. The 70 years up, in his third year of his reign. He wants to celebrate because the Jews weren't redeemed, right? He's going to hold on to his power forever. In his mind, Hashem has abandoned the Jews. He's now the, he's all excited. And this is really where it's at this point where the Megillah opens. Now, of course, he was mistaken yet again, because we see that the 70 years was exactly from destruction to rebuild. Right? That was 70 years. Now, it wasn't 70 years of being conquered or a foreign dominion. It was 70 years of not having a Beis Mikdash. Okay, so this is the point where the Megillah starts. So Vashti, as we mentioned, she is the daughter of Belshazzar, the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She was a horrible person herself, another terrible anti-Semite. Part of her beauty treatment was bathing in the blood of Jewish children. She had Jewish maids that she deliberately would make work on Shabbos, to deliberately make sure that they could not keep Shabbos. And she enjoyed torturing them by making these young girls have to do things on Shabbos they're not meant to do. And she would get them to do things even though she had no need for it. Later on, we're going to see that her end, Hashem makes things middah k'neged middah. The way a person behaves, that's how they get treated in the end. So she was vain and she murdered for her beauty treatment. And we see it through her being vain and her beauty treatment, her beauty gets dealt with, gets punished in the end. All right. Haman, he is from Amalek. Now, Amalek are a unique type of anti-Semites. Right? Other anti-Semites, there can be a lot of people who don't like us, unfortunately. And but nevertheless, if they know you are going to win, they don't start. If they know that somehow they can gain from you, then generally they don't like to make problems for you. So the classic example is Achashverosh, terrible anti-Semite. He was quite happy for Haman to kill the Jews. Says, Haman, you're doing me a favor. In the end, when he thought that Haman had become his enemy, and it was Mordechai and Esther who were helping him out, so it worked in his favor to be nice to Jews, at least temporarily. He's quite happy to do so. And throughout history, there have been enemies who do not attack us, who, because they're afraid that we're going to win. And throughout history, there's been enemies that Jewish people have been able to bribe, to leave us alone, different things. And I'm not necessarily recommending any of these courses of action, but saying historically this is what's happened. Amalek, though, is the anti-Semite who is willing to die for the sake of killing Jews. They don't care about anything. Their life's mission is to kill Jews. Now, where did Amalek come from? Amalek was one of Haman's grandsons. Sorry, Esau's grandsons, right? Amalek was one of Esau's grandsons. We have Yaakov and Esau, two brothers, and Esau hated his brother Yaakov. And he used to sit with his favorite little grandson on his lap, bouncing him on his knee. And instead of telling him stories, like grandfather, normally, grandparents tell their grandchildren sweet stories. He's telling his grandson, I hate Yaakov. I want to kill him. I want to kill his kids. He cheated me. I want to get him. And one day his little grandson looked up with a smile and says, don't worry, Zadie. I'll kill him for you. I'll wipe them all out. And that was the birth of Amalek. So just as a side point to this, you can see the power the grandparents can have on the grandchildren. So we, those of us who are grandparents and those who are not yet, God willing, will be, we need to make sure to use that power for the positive. Sing Torah Tzivalonu, something with your grandchildren. They should associate these happy memories with their happy feelings of the grandchildren, with their grandparents. It's something positive, something spiritual, and not, God forbid, like Amalek and his grandfather Esau. So Amalek are people that will stop at nothing to kill the Jews. And when the Jewish people left Egypt, everyone was afraid. There'd been the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea. No one is going to start with the Jews. Along come Amalek and they attack. Now they know they're going to lose. And the sages, which Rashi brings down this parable that they give, the sages give, it's like a person who puts his foot into a boiling bath. Even though he gets his foot scalded, it's burned. But other people say, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. He's still alive, I can do it too. And so once Amalek attacked, this took away the fear that the other nations had. And this became an issue. So we have a mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. Now, the reason we have a mitzvah to wipe out Amalek, on a simple level, because God said, right? The reason we don't normally kill people is because God said we don't kill people. Here, God says we do. But to understand a little bit why, because this is the kind of anti-Semites that will never stop. And they don't care if they go to jail, they don't care if they die, they don't care, that just as long as they get to kill Jews, then it becomes a matter of self-defense. And preemptive strike is not only permitted in Jewish law for self-defense, but it's mandated. And if the only way to stop someone to protect your life is to kill them, then obviously you don't need to kill someone. Someone that, God forbid, gets attacked and he can overpower the person and tie him up. So that's what you do. You don't kill someone. But if the only way to protect one's life is to kill the attacker, then the mitzvah is, you have to kill them. So that was what happened with Amalek. The Jewish people were not able to defeat Amalek because they weren't united. When we had our first king, King Shaul HaMelech, he united the Jewish people and he defeated Amalek and he killed them all. one small mistake he made. The king of Amalek, although he was executed one day later, he felt that the king, being a king, deserves a royal execution. So he let him live another day. He treated him royally, which means he had servants and different things, and he was executed the next day. Unfortunately, that extra night that he lived, he impregnated a maid, and Amalek continued. Right? And so again, without getting too sidetracked, we see the opposite in Megillus Rus. This is why we should never delay a mitzvah. In the book of Rus, Avimelech marries Rus. Sorry, Boaz. Right? Boaz marries Rus. My apologies. Boaz marries Rus, and he passes away the next day. Rus became pregnant. Through Rus, through this marriage, we have King David, King Solomon, eventually Mashiach, right? Many great Jewish leaders throughout the years have all come through this. If he would have waited one day to marry her, we would never have had these people. I mean, I guess Hashem would have made it happen a different way, but on the surface, we would not have had these people. If King Shaul would not have delayed a day, we would have done the mitzvah, taken care of the Amalek king immediately. We would not have had Haman, we wouldn't have had Nazis, et cetera, et cetera. So we see the dangers or possible ramifications of delaying any mitzvah. So not every mitzvah has life-threatening or life-altering ramifications, but everything we do has consequences, positive and negatives. So we should try not to push off any mitzvah. And I specifically mentioned Nazis as an example of Amalek for a few reasons. Number one, the Kaiser of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire visited Israel around about 1900, early, I'm not sure the exact year. And the Jewish people went out to greet him for two reasons. Number one, having Austrian citizenship, Austrian passport, gave you protection from the Turks. Number two is that relative to other kings, he was pretty good at the time. And the other reason was to be able to say a bracha on a king. There's a special bracha that we say if you see a king. So Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, he was the unofficial chief rabbi of the Ashkenazim at the time, and he did not go out to greet them, to greet the king. And they asked him, even if you don't care about a king, this is your only chance in your life to say this bracha. Don't you want to say the bracha? So he told them that he has a Messiah, he has a tradition from his rabbis, from his teachers, who have from their teachers that the Germanic people are descendants of Amalek. And he has no intention of saying a bracha on a king from Amalek. And we only have to see what happened not so long up. Doesn't mean every individual, but we see the Amalek style of anti-Semitism, that even a stage where they still could have potentially won the war, instead of sending all their resources to the front, they diverted resources from the front. They're taking trains, taking things away to send more Jews to the gas chambers, Chas v'shalom. Right? This type of, in other words, we'll lose, we'll die, it doesn't matter as long as you get more Jews. This type of mindset, that is the mindset of Amalek. In concept, someone walked in the room now. I mean, we're all in different rooms, so I guess let's just pretend we're all in the same room, right? Someone walked in the room now, and we would know for a fact they are from Amalek, and you have to know for a fact. We would have a mitzvah to kill them on the spot. Now, you might say, well, you go to jail. But, there were Jews who went to jail, for example, in Soviet Russia and various things, for eating matzah. It's one mitzvah, another mitzvah. But as we don't know about anyone that are Amalek, there might be people we have a suspicion, but there's no one we know for a fact. So, as long as there's any doubt, we can't take that kind of action. Always have the reminds of the comic. The teacher was trying to show his class how to eliminate Amalek. So he says to the students, "Watch carefully, because I can only do this once." Right, that's anyway. Sorry, bad joke. It's early in the morning. Didn't have enough coffee yet. All right, but that's Haman. He's a descendant from Amalek. He has a type of anti-Semitism that cannot be bought. Okay, then we have Mordechai. Mordechai was a member of the Sanhedrin, which you're talking about one of the most brilliant people, in the world. We're going to see later on the story. So he had to at least understand 71 languages, the 70 languages of the nations, plus Hebrew. In the Sanhedrin, again, I know we're going from tangents, but I guess it's good general knowledge. The Sanhedrin was the supreme Jewish court, and matters of life and death went to the Sanhedrin, or at least a court authorized by a Sanhedrin or mini Sanhedrin. And people involved in these cases had to be able to understand any witness or a plaintiff or a person involved in the court directly. They could not hear testimony through an interpreter, because it's not the same. There was a case which I believe is true in America. I mean, they got put into movies and different things as a comedy, but I've been told it really happened. That's where they got the idea from. There was a person who shoplifted, and right after they left, someone else came in and held up the store and shot the person, the cashier. And witness had seen the first person go in, and it was right after, so it was in the time frame. And so this person shoplifted was arrested for suspected murder. He had no idea that he'd even been a murder. He thought he'd been arrested for shoplifting. And so they're interviewing him in the police station. And they said, so what did you do? So he tells, right, I did it, I went in, I took something. I said, why'd you do it? I felt like it. And in the story, he's not saying how he shot the cashier, the checkout. So the officer asked, so when did you shoot the shop assistant, whatever? And the penny drops, and the fellow says, I shot the shop assistant. He says, yes. When did you shoot? He says, I shot anyone. I shot someone. So it went to court, and the fellow's reading out the testimony, the police officer. He says, I asked him, when did you shoot the shop assistant? And he answered me, I shot the shop assistant. I asked him again, why do you shoot the shop assistant? He says, I shot someone. Right? So this is before you change any languages. This is just tone of voice. Change the meaning from one extreme to the other extreme. Never mind that anyone's had a experience with more than one languages. Now there's many words that don't have exact translation, and you can't exactly translate. So when it comes to serious matters, the judges had to be able to hear the testimony either from the person involved or from a witness directly without a translator. At least one member of the Sanhedrin had to be fluent in speaking the language, so they could ask the questions. But everyone had to have a high-level understanding. Didn't have to necessarily be fluent. They had to hear, they had to understand well what they heard. So that's besides the fact they had to know the entire Torah, everything you can imagine. So you're talking about the greatest of geniuses. And we see later in the story, of course, that Mordechai's ability to know these languages becomes a part of the story. So he was one of the greatest minds in the world, never mind the Jewish people. He was a great tzaddik. And when the king was taken into captivity, he was taken as well. Now, if we look at the time frame, he would have been relatively young. Let's just say approximately 30s. So you're talking about someone who, relatively young age has become a member of the Sanhedrin. You're talking about someone absolutely incredible. Now, Esther was his relative, a niece, a cousin. It's not so clear. Her father died while his mother was pregnant, before she was born. Her mother died in childbirth. Mordechai adopted her, and a miracle happened. He even nursed her. Right? So it's when I learn things, I often see a picture in my mind. And I remember being in school. I don't remember exactly which grade, but when I first learned this, and I had this mental image of this old, this great rabbi nursing a little baby, and I laughed more than I should have. But anyway, he raised her. At the point where the Purim story happens, they were half married. Half married means like this. There are two parts to a Jewish marriage. Today, we do both parts under the chuppah, one immediately after the other. Till Roman times, the first part which is where we give the ring. The first part was done at one time, and the second part of the marriage was done a year later. And that time in between, they paid for the marriage. So the first part of the Jewish marriage means that this lady can no longer marry anyone else. She can't have relations with anyone else. To undo the first part requires a get, a Jewish divorce or the death of the husband, but they can't live together yet either. The second part of the marriage, so the first part withdraws the wife from being able to marry anyone else, and the second part completes the marriage to him. And this is where the non-Jews get the idea of engagement and engagement rings. Right? Engagement rings is, by the way, in halacha very problematic, because if someone says, will you marry me? And gives the ring and she says yes, and particularly if there's witnesses, then if they break off the engagement, they probably need to get a get, have a get. And if they don't, there's problems. Children could be a mamzer, chas v'shalom. There's a lot of potential problems. Of course, today there's an expectation that the bride is going to get a diamond ring and various things. So some communities, the parents give it. Other communities, it's given after the marriage. In the religious world. But these were the two parts of the Jewish marriage. In Roman times, they changed how it was done because, unfortunately, the Romans had a habit of going to a town, picking up the whole town, and sending them to another part of the Roman Empire, either as slaves or for some other purpose. And we're having situations where people have done the first part of the marriage. This young girl this lady can no longer get married to anyone else without a get. And either she or the groom have disappeared somewhere in the Roman Empire. There's no telephones, no email. There's no Facebook to find them again. So they're gone. So we changed the system and started doing the two parts of Jewish marriage under the chuppah at the same time. And that's what we do today. But at this time, that at least had the first part of the marriage, which of course begs the question then, we know that, those who are in the Hilchah Shabbos, learn the Shabbos laws together, we know that life-threatening situation overrules all the mitzvahs of the Torah, except for three. One is to worship idols. A person has to give up their life and worship an idol. One is to murder an innocent person. You have to rather give the own life rather than murder an innocent person. Because why is his blood redder than your blood? And the third is immorality. So seemingly, and the Talmud asked this question, why didn't Esther give up her life rather than being taken by Achashverosh? So the answer that explains is that really only applies to men. In other words, she didn't actively participate. She just lay there, and essentially she was raped against her will. She never went willingly, and since she did not actively do anything, she did not have to give up her life. It's really only a man who has to be actively involved, or whatever. Anyway, that's we'll try and keep it PG rated. You know, this year won't go any further. So that's the this, by the way, although we're skipping, when Mordechai tells Esther to go to the king, and she answers, you know, well, first she says, you know, if you go without being called, you can be executed. But when she agrees to go, she says, if I'll be lost, I'll be lost. Now, on one level, that means she was willing to risk her life. But on the other level, this meant this was the first time she was going willingly to Achashverosh and not forced. And that means now she loses her husband. Because being willingly with someone else, the person the marriage, there has to be a divorce, God forbid. So this is what she was worried about she's also going to lose her husband. So these are the main characters. Right, any questions or comments before we get into the text? No? Okay, well, I set a record, a 47-minute introduction. So we'll see if we can beat that on another day.
I was only going to suggest one thing. According to
Yes.
what I understand, most of the Chazal, Esther was 75 years old at the
Yes.
time.
Yeah. She wasn't young, and we're going to also mention she wasn't good looking. Right? I was going to wait till we got there, but since we brought it up, her skin was a little bit greenish. I don't think that means she looked like the Incredible Hulk, but you see some of those people with kidney issues, sometimes they'll have like a greenish sort of yellowish, you know. But when people saw her, they saw whatever they envisioned to be a beautiful woman. So you can imagine, you know, there was a Chinese person and an African person and a European type person. They're all looking at her, and one seeing, you know, an Asian beauty, one seeing an African beauty, one seeing a European. And it was whatever people in their mind imagined to be beautiful, that's what they saw when they saw her. So it would have made interesting conversations, you know, when people were discussing it. So anyway, that is the, all right, yes, Rob.
I guess the question is, I haven't started reading the Megillah yet, the Book of Esther, but is there any commentary relative to why she appeared differently to everyone else other than her actual persona? Was there any conversation about that? The significance of it?
We're going to see the wording of the verse says that people saw.
Yeah, but was there but there was any conversation or commentary?
So there's two aspects. Number one, just on the surface level, is this is what was needed to happen for her to achieve what needed to be achieved. But what it was her inner beauty that was being reflected on her outside.
Okay.
The same, similar, let's say Shimshon, but Samson, was, again, unlike Western versions of the story, which means Christianity, he wasn't a Tarzan running around in a loincloth. He was a great Torah scholar, and he dressed as rabbis did at the time. But he was a cripple. He had to walk with two walking sticks. And at certain times, not all the time, at certain times, his spiritual strength was reflected as physical strength. And the first time happened at his bar mitzvah. Right? That's there he was. He's just turned bar mitzvah, and this little boy, his whole life had to walk along with 2 walking sticks. All of a sudden, had this incredible strength surge through him, and he began to run. First time he ran in his life, and he ran, and he picked up 2 mountains. Now, when it says mountains, I don't think that means like Mount Everest, and the 2 large on the side. A road had been cut through a large stone. And he picked up the 2 and he smashed them together and ground them together. All right, so he's superhuman feat of strength. And I guess some people noticed. People probably noticed if 13-year-old boys pick up mountains and bang them together and whatever. And then when the leader of the Plishtim was coming to Shimshon's father, who was leader of the Jewish people, to tell him that there's a decree going to be put into place. And one of his advisors, when they're traveling, they saw this smashed mountain. They said, what happened? And one of the advisors said, well, this boy, this kid. And when he comes to the house, he sees that's the kid. The fellow decides, well, he's just going to leave quietly without giving any new decrees. Right? And this is how Samson got the idea of doing things personally, twisting it into like a personal war, and he can stop the Plishtim without affecting other the Jews who wouldn't be able to survive an attack. Right, so it's a similar idea. His spiritual strength was reflected physically, and Esther's spiritual beauty, her inner beauty, true beauty. Right, as we say in the Eishes Chal Sheker Achain, right, the external physical beauty without anything behind it is meaningless, and someone who's spiritual, who's truly a good person, that's the real beauty. Okay, so we'll read through the verses, we'll translate them, and we'll comment a little bit as we go along. Okay,
Rabbi,
yes.
do we know who, after Haman and his sons were killed, do we know who carried on that Amalek seed?
Okay, now it's not going to be all his sons were killed. Right, he had over 100 sons. He had a rather large harem, and it seems that 10 were hung with him. When he got hung, there were some other of Haman's sons that were killed, in the actual Purim day, in the miracle. But there were, and some of his sons, even before they were killed, could have had children. And he wasn't necessarily the only Amalek who was alive at that time. So there was plenty of options. Plenty of options, unfortunately. Okay. So it says, "Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh," and it was in the days of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? He is Achashverosh, Hamelech that ruled. He was the king. Hoidel Bad Kush, from Hoidel. Hoidel is in the region of India. I mean, in modern Hebrew it's used as in, but it's like the word Hindu, right? It's that sort of word. And Kush, although today it's used as Ethiopia, in biblical times it means the whole African continent. So somewhere over there, wherever those places were. Sheba ve'esrim Omeya Medina. There was 127 countries or provinces or little states. That's who it was. Okay, so a few things. It says Hamoilech, which those who know Hebrew grammar, and became king, it means he was actively king. Right? Because we said he didn't inherit the title, he made himself the king. So that's hinted there. Right? He wasn't deserving, he had a lot of wealth, he essentially purchased his position. So it says 127 countries. So what happened was, he apparently originally had more when he first became king. But through his lack of good management, not being a nice person, he lost a few in a war. That's one thing. But Rabbi Akiva taught that the 127 corresponds to Sarah, who lived for 127 years. And it's the daughter of Sarah, lived 127 years, was able to overcome the evil plan of the king of 127 countries. So that's into that. Okay. So beyond the Haim, in those days, Yeshavas Hamelch Achashverosh, when the king Achashverosh sat al Kisei Malchusoi on his throne, Sheb Shushan Abira, which was in Shushan, the capital city. Okay, so we've got lots to say, not a lot of time, but we'll just say one thing quickly. So-called Bible scholars. Now, by Bible scholars, I don't mean rabbis. I mean like university Bible scholars and things. So, and I say so-called because most of the PhD Bible scholars actually know less than, our 5th or 6th graders that learn Chumash in school with the Jewish commentaries and various things. But they all have an agenda to try and say the Torah is not true. Why do they do that? So the first ones were Christians. Christians have to say that the 5 books of Moses are not the word of God, right? We know that Shem dictated each letter, each word to Moshe, and he wrote it down. If they would believe that, then you can't have Christianity, right? Because everything they believe in doesn't fit. So they have to say it's not really true. The Reform conservative have to say it's really true, because if it's really the word of God, you can't have all these other things. The secular scholars have to say it's not true, because if it is true, you can't live a secular lifestyle, right? So therefore, every scholar outside the Torah world has an agenda, consciously or subconsciously, to try and say that it's not true. One of the things they used to say was that the Megillah Esther, the story of Esther, cannot be true. 2 proofs they had. Number 1, the capital was not Shushan, which it wasn't. Number 2, the Persians did not build palaces in the style as described in the Megillah. Now, what happened is, in the Persian capital, Persepolis and other places, they found a lot of cuneiform tablets, a lot of tablets written in a script called cuneiform, and they weren't able to read them. Now, what then happened a little bit after this is they found huge walls in excavations, and these walls usually had a whole group of laws and written in 3 languages side by side, in ancient Greek, in Aramaic, and in cuneiform. And through having the 3 languages side by side saying the same thing on quite a few different places, they were able to decipher cuneiform. Once they deciphered it, they went back and started reading all the tablets that they'd accumulated over the years. In one of these tablets, they found that the capital was temporarily moved for 17 years due to famine and war, and it was X amount of miles. I don't remember how many miles now, or whatever Persian measurements they had. I think it was north of the capital. So archaeologists went that distance from the capital in that direction, and they found a little village called Susan. And they started to excavate, and I'm sure you're all very surprised to hear this, but they found the ruins of a palace. And as they excavated this massive palace, not only was it built exactly like the Megillah says, but even all the extra details in the Midrashim and the Talmud is exactly the layout how it was. Now, the whole story of the Megillah takes a place of a period of 14 years. So all, if not most of those 14 years, I guess, were during the 17 years where the capital was relocated. Now, not that we need an archaeological find so for us to know the Torah is true. We know it's true anyway. But the fact that it's found, they had proof it can't be. Well, but it was, and we see that it was. So, so this Shushan Abira, this capital city of Shushan, was not always the capital. Now, seemingly the main part of the palace is older. It was probably like a summer home or something. And when they moved there, it was greatly expanded. And it's in the third year. And the significance of the third year is this is when Achashverosh calculated the 70 years is going to be up. So I guess we've gone over time by a minute. So we'll stop here. And tomorrow, God willing, get straight into the text. And any questions before we go?
Rabbi, when will the tape, the video of this lesson be available?
I'm not sure. So Rabbi Smith is still doing that.
Okay.
Okay.
Do that via distance, but I presume in not much longer than it normally takes. All right.
Okay.
Well, wish everyone an amazing day.
You too.
Thank
See you
you.
tomorrow, God willing.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Present, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Stay
Bye-bye,
safe.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.